if a man is in that stage of his development where he is soaking up the sound baths, he's going to ecstatic dance, he's exploring polyamory, there is a lack of stability there, which the feminine perceives and inherently doesn't trust, because it's like, it's going with the flow attitude versus like, this is what I want, this is the life I'm building, do you want to come with me?
Hello, friend, and welcome to the Sex Upgraded podcast, a podcast for men all about sex, where we'll combine real, authentic, and down-to-earth conversations about sex, life, and relationships with some pretty wild personal stories and practical how-to episodes as well, with guest experts from around the world to help you have the most amazing sex life you can possibly have. My name is Taylor, and I'll be your host on this journey, and it's my goal with each episode to give you practical, actionable things you can start doing today to improve your sex life and your entire life, because a thriving sex life will help you thrive in all areas of your life. So let's begin today's episode by starting with a deep breath in through the nose into the belly together. Exhaling with an audible sigh. And let's get into today's episode. Jasper, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for showing up to be here for this conversation today. I'm really excited to talk about it, all things masculinity, sex, and relationships. You are joining in from the other side of the world right now. Is that right? You're in Thailand?
Copenhagen, man. Good to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, Copenhagen. I used to live on that island too years ago, and it was always interesting to try to come up with the name of how to actually pronounce it. Copenhagen, Copenhagen. Some people call it all kinds of stuff, but yeah, some people call it Tantra Island. You could probably find like 5 play parties every week at least there.
We, my partner and I would call it Fuckboy Island, actually.
Ah, Fuckboy Island.
Yeah.
How appropriate to the theme of our conversation today.
I think
that's awesome. So if you're listening, this whole conversation got inspired in part because a few months ago I posted on my personal Facebook account this post that talks about how there are a lot of women that I know who are in the so-called conscious scene who complain and say that they're having trouble finding a conscious man or a good man or a solid man to date. And most of what they find is what they would call fuckboys or guys who just aren't solid. And this is a regular complaint that I've heard in a lot of different hotspots of conscious community around the world, like Asheville being one of those, Thailand being one, different places in California, Austin, etc. And then literally 48 hours after I posted that, a friend sent me one of your reels where you're on your Instagram account talking about this very thing. And I thought, man, we got to have a conversation about this because this is some systemic stuff that seems like a really big deal that needs to be talked about. So I'm curious, what inspired you to make that reel?
Well, look, I think it's born of an observation. Actually, being here on this island, we see that dynamic being played out a lot. And in the work that I'm doing as a coach, talking to a lot of men and women about these issues, obviously it's something which is very prevalently complained about, especially by women. Here on the island and in general, they're saying, where are all the good, strong, conscious masculine men? And what I observe is this kind of pendulum swing from guys being emotionally unavailable, somehow finding this impulse to start waking up to that side of themselves and that sensitive side, but going kind of too far in the other direction. And that kind of flips the polarity. It ties into a lot of the more global, dynamics of flipped polarity that we see playing out around the world. And in communities, especially like this, when there is a play party every weekend, there's multiple ecstatic dances every week. People come here with this kind of Peter Pan attitude of coming to escape and, get in touch with themselves. It inherently leads to this groundlessness or instability, which obviously women feel that, and it can be a major turnoff.
Yeah. Which is interesting that it often leads to a grounded sort of instability. And I think back on my life, and I've done a ton of ecstatic dance. I've done on all kinds of cacao ceremonies and spiritual events and kirtans and et cetera, you name it. And when I think back to like sort of my peak in that time period, I definitely was very ungrounded and I feeling like I was grounded at the same time. And you could make the argument that I was grounded in certain aspects of reality, but not in the sort of like material, how to make this life actually work style reality. And that was a big wake up for me, you know? And I
Look,
pulled
and
up
I
here
certainly
on your
had my
Instagram.
stages too.
Go ahead.
I was just saying, I certainly had my stages too when I was traveling, going to India many times, living in these kind of communities, holding ecstatic dances. And there's that had played a specific role in my development because that was something that really helped me to get in touch with the feminine inside of me. The problem is when we get stuck there and we neglect the other aspects of reality and especially of our survival and forget to build the foundations of the life that we want, because inherently, if you want to progress further, you need to build those foundations to have that stability to launch yourself towards, higher development.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, there's so many directions I want to go here, but this is such an interesting topic. You spoke to developing a connection with the feminine within, and I want to get there. But at first, I want to read from your Instagram. You posted a bit ago a poll on your Instagram where you asked, and I'll quote it here. You say, "What do women think of guys who are overly obsessed with yoga, tantra, sound baths, and ecstatic dance?" And there were 3 different options on there. And one of the options was, all good, that's my kind of guy. 31% of people responded and clicked that. But then you had 2 other options, and one of them says, "Not really sure, but I don't trust him." That was 40% of the responses. And the other 30% were women who said they're hyper feminine and it's a major turnoff for me, with the vomit emoji. So that was really interesting. Like 70% of people, or 70% of, I'm assuming mostly it's women who responded to this, said that they don't feel either comfortable or don't trust men who regularly frequent these kinds of places. That's really interesting.
Shocking.
Why do you think that is?
Look, I would have to say that there is, like, the feminine, women in general have a very finely tuned sense and antenna towards the state of safety that a man creates. And if a man is in that stage of his development where he is soaking up the sound baths, he's going to ecstatic dance, he's exploring polyamory, there is a lack of stability there, which the feminine perceives and inherently doesn't trust, because it's like, it's going with the flow attitude versus like, this is what I want, this is the life I'm building, do you want to come with me? It's a very different flavor energetically, which women obviously pick up on that and are wary towards men who are in that state. At least that's what I would assume. That's the vibe I'm getting when I talk to women about this. They would actually much rather a man who has his shit together, who has a normal job, and maybe he's not so spiritually open, he's not so emotionally developed, but he has like the foundations of his life in place. That's inherently much more attractive from a certain point of view, because it's safe. It's much more safe.
Yeah. So devil's advocate though, do you think it is possible for men to go to ecstatic dances and sound baths, et cetera, and be in the grounded space in their life and just choose to do that from a place of enjoyment versus this cycle of being stuck in it?
I think it's definitely possible, although probably less likely. I mean, the guy that is very grounded, very stable, he's on his mission, he's got a very clearly defined sense of purpose in his life. He probably doesn't have so much time to be going to ecstatic dance multiple times a week and all the play parties, et cetera, et cetera. He wants stability, and he's focusing his energy in a specific direction and not kind of just going with the flow. I mean, personally, I would go to an ecstatic dance once every now and then. I could enjoy a sound bath maybe sometimes,
Yeah.
I certainly did in the future, but now, that I'm much more focused on my career, my purpose, my business and my own spiritual practice, it's not so enticing to me anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. I hear that and I can relate. And I just don't want to totally pathologize those things. Like, I think there's a certain stage and a state, like, and I can see it in my younger self where I did go through that. And I was very like swept up, you could say, in the vortex of the conscious growth, receiving type mentality. And now I do go to ecstatic dance less, but I still love to go. Just for anybody listening, in case you're curious, like I even play in an ecstatic dance band. Like, that's a way that I've found I can really like dance with the space in an even more intentional way that I love to do. But I don't go as sort of like my religion, you could say, as it used to be,
Yeah. And I think the key point is balance. When I was doing those things and going obsessively and really indulging myself in that, it was at the neglect of getting my life together, earning money, building things, creating a career and a sense of direction with myself. Now now I have those things. I appreciate those things a lot, the ecstatic dance and all of that. It's beautiful. And men should do that. It's definitely putting themselves in touch with the feminine inside of them, which is extremely valuable in terms of your relationships and your ability to connect in a deeper way and create deep emotional intimacy. You want that capability. You just don't want it to be at the neglect of having your stuff together, being grounded and stable and doing something important with your life.
Yeah. Yeah, the deeper we go in this conversation, the more I'm really just feeling like this is a conversation for, I guess, my younger self and or any man who is kind of caught up in that swirl right now and who may be like fully enjoying it and having a good time, but then at the same time might not be making the kind of money he wants to be making, might be having trouble finding the kind of relationships that he wants, might have trouble feeling like he is on his purpose. And I think back to one woman who commented on that Facebook post that I made and said, "Ooh, where can I find all of these good men?" Because in that post, I also said, there are good men out there. There are solid and grounded men. And she's like, where are they? And I perceive this person to be somebody who is surrounded by a lot of men in this community. And so I responded and said, hey, I don't want to come across as too intense, but like I notice you are, at least from an outside perspective, surrounded by what seem to be a lot of awesome men in this sort of conscious circle. What's the deal? Like, why would you post that here? And she said, oh yeah, it's true. I am, but most of them, if not all of them, have trouble actually making money and creating secure housing for themselves. And sure, they're really fun and they're great at kissing. And, I'm paraphrasing and making some stuff up, but this is basically what she said, like they're great at all these sort of like conscious events sort of things. But when it comes to actually creating a reality in the world that is sustainable and safe, like not happening for them. So that was very interesting.
And it's something we see, especially here on the island, a lot of women, a lot of people in general complain. When my partner and I share that we've been in a relationship for 4 years, people are like, oh my God, that's unusual. How have you done that? We're magical creatures from a distant land. Like it's just kind of unheard of here because everyone is just like bouncing from one to the next. And that's the kind of vibe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Same actually. My partner and I, girlfriend, we're not technically married, but we're in it. We're committed. We just bought a house together. And when I've told some people that, or when some people in Asheville have heard that, they're like, oh my God, like, why? What would you like? Holy shit. That level of commitment is so intense. And I'm like, yeah, but it's like the next step. It feels right. It feels exciting. It feels good. It doesn't feel like this giant monumental thing. It feels like, oh, this is the logical thing to do. And it's very exciting at the same time. We're in some ways a kind of anomaly as well. And I'm hesitant to, like, I don't want to come across as saying like, oh, you and I have it all figured out. But I think you and I have both come from a certain kind of similar background where we've made some big choices to kind of shift things up and create a new reality. And I'm curious, what sort of shifts did you make to change? Like, was there a decision point when you realized, hey, I'm actually kind of stuck in this cycle. I want something different for my life. And then if so, what did you do?
Yeah, so for me, the major thing that I became aware of was my tendency to want to spiritually bypass most of my core survival needs. And I was spending all of this time doing retreats, 5 hours a day of yoga and meditation, intense amounts of practice. but I didn't have my life together.
Mm.
And then I realized at a certain stage that my spiritual growth and my capacity to maintain states of high consciousness was severely limited because I simply didn't have my survival taken care of. So I would have beautiful states, and then I would come back to a life that was a bit of a wreck. My relationships weren't healthy. I didn't have much money. I had no particular career orientation. And then what's the point? Of course, those spiritual states are amazing, but if you come back to a life that is not conducive for the integration of those states and really making deeper sense and deeper meaning, I could see very clearly that my progress would reach a certain limit and I wouldn't actually have the kind of life and experience of life that I want to have. So I realized I was kind of getting ahead of myself somehow, and spirituality was the crowning glory as an achievement at the cherry on the cake of my life, but I hadn't built the cake yet. So I started to come back and realize, oh, actually, money is important. Spirituality is very important. That's the epitome of spiritual, personal growth and development, but not without the fundamentals that can actually sustain you, create safety for you, your partner, a certain amount of abundance, so you can truly enjoy the best things that life has to offer, and then pursue on top of that, these beautiful higher states and achievements.
Yeah, nice. And so how did you make that change? Like, were there some observable behavioral shifts that you did? Like, did you stop going to certain things? Did you start doing other things?
Probably the major shift was COVID, to be honest. When everything sort of got locked down, there was not really much opportunity to do all of those things that I was so used to being a part of. And that just pushed me online. And I had been wanting to step into coaching and really devote and go full time with that. Before it was just dabbling. And then COVID came along and I was able to really just launch into it and saw success pretty much straight away. And things just continued from there. So.
But not in the sort of coaching space, but I would say like in your personal life, like what were the behavioral shifts you made to, like, yes, you stopped going to all those events, but were there other things that you did that were sort of generative of this different kind of presence? Do you know what I mean? Like, you probably didn't stop going to ecstatic dance and start coaching without doing some other things in your life to sort of bolster this other kind of presence or embodiment. You see what I'm saying? Or maybe you did. I don't know.
It's kind of hard to put a finger on exactly, like, if there was one specific thing or. I think it was actually probably motivated by a state of deep depression and struggle, particularly, like, I would say, like, the dark night of my soul in my life. This moment when things just were not working. My relationship wasn't working. I wasn't earning money. I could do all the spiritual practice in the world, but it wasn't changing. The fact that I hadn't addressed my attachment wounds, I hadn't become, conscious of the way that I was going about conflict and communication in my relationship. So those things were just like smacking me in the face at a certain point. And I realized I really had to get serious about those fundamentals.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember looking at one of your Instagram posts and you said some of the bigger life-changing things for you at some point around that phase were learning how to make money, learning how to handle your emotions, and learning how to fight, even like physically fight. And I'm curious, like, could you talk about those things and how they related to this?
Yeah. I mean, I went from a background of daily yoga for basically 6 years and fully on the tantric path. And that was my, obsessive kind of devotion to that. And then I was always quite physical, and good with the yoga practice. But then I got to a certain point where I felt like my masculinity was lacking this, like, primal essential pillar of knowing how to handle myself. And the benefit that comes in the relationship when the woman that you're with knows that you have really got things under control and she feels safe with you. Because, we went through some difficult times and, I was not grounded. I was not very emotionally mature. I didn't know how to take care of myself. I didn't have money. So it's no wonder that my relationship wasn't going very well. She didn't feel safe to be with me, you know? So I saw those things, and I really wanted to make, the relationship that I have now, I wanted to make that as beautiful as I possibly could. So I started to get really serious about those things and saw that I needed to earn money. I needed to get more physical and learn how to defend myself. Not even because I think that I'll need it, but just because it's like a mindset shift, because it's like a subtle tweak inside of me, which gives me an extra boost of confidence, because I know what to do now. And now I train, I'm a bit addicted to it, but I do, jiu-jitsu every day, pretty much 6 days a week. So I'm swinging in the other direction, maybe overcompensating a bit, but I love it.
Yeah. And I think it's useful to point out that it cultivates a sort of different internal presence, a different internal energy, doing potentially jujitsu every day versus doing yoga, asana, breathwork every day, right? That's adjusting something about your internal compass and even how you perceive the world and how you walk in the world. I remember a workshop that I did once where we were proactively building certain different elements of masculinity. And one day we focused on the solar plexus, the power center. If you're not familiar with those terms, basically just like your belly. And in a lot of different traditions, this is where it's said, this is where your power emanates from. So that day we went out and we actually did kickboxing and Muay Thai, just for the sake of generating this more explosive, like outward type fighting energy. It was really interesting to watch what happened and to be a part of this group of guys go through that process. And beforehand, we were this sort of like, soft might be too strong of a word, but I'll just say like afterwards, there was this edge that you could feel with everybody. And it was a good edge. It wasn't like edgy, ungrounded. It was like, ooh, there's a little bit of like cultivated sharpness here that's really potent. It's really potent. And I remember going back, this was years ago, but I remember going back to my girlfriend after that day and having like really fucking amazing sex. and because I had cultivated that kind of presence and internal energy that I hadn't before. And I was like, wow, there's actually really something to this. Maybe more so than just learning how to kick.
I also noticed really interesting benefits in terms of lovemaking and my capacity to like have a more resilient nervous system. And I think so many of my issues that I had earlier on with premature ejaculation was stemming from this kind of nice guy tendency, a nervous system that was actually chronically dysregulated and shut down and not conditioned to handle kind of high states of stress. And exposing myself to this kind of like raw primal masculine side actually helped me to gain like this deeper state of capacity to handle energy and hold energy in my nervous system. Not only that, obviously, but that was a component. Yeah.
Yeah. Love that. Love hearing that. So something you've said a couple of times so far is you've talked about how it's important for men to confront or become in connection with the feminine on the inside. And I'd like to tease that apart a little bit, because you were also saying how like being in these spaces too much can kind of drop men too much into that space. But what is the appropriate amount, or how does one develop a healthy relationship with their internal feminine?
For me, one of the most important things was learning how to feel and overcoming my fear of being vulnerable and making myself vulnerable, because I was taught to believe that that would make me weak, that my lover would no longer be attracted to me, that I wouldn't have the respect of other men or women. And one of the most beautiful gifts that my partner's given me was this tender curiosity towards what my heart was feeling. She showed me that that was something that she longed to see. She wanted to see that deeper part of me. And so when I started to actually open up and develop more emotional intelligence and allowed myself to be vulnerable, obviously the initial phase was this, I would say I went too far into the feminine, because there was a lot of, we had certain moments where we broke up and I was crying a lot, letting all of this stuff out, and really like the dam had just collapsed and I was just overwhelmed by this, decades of emotion that I'd been building up inside of myself, but never allowing myself to fully feel. Now, once I got through that initial stage, what it gave me was this deeper connection to myself and what I feel, and removed this shame and the fear of actually feeling the shame about my shame, and I was actually gained access to all these new experiences of what I was feeling and all the nuances and depths and the ability to articulate that. Mm. And then obviously, once I learned that capacity, she felt so much safer with me because she could tell that I had the capacity to hold myself. And therefore, when she was triggered or dysregulated or upset about something, she knew that I could hold her as well.
Yeah. Mm.
So I would say it's been instrumental in my capacity to actually develop a healthy relationship.
Mm-hmm. And I think it's useful to point out that in the beginning stages of that, it might not happen in the most perfectly cultivated way.
Definitely not. It's going to be a bit ugly sometimes.
Yeah. And having self-compassion during that phase is super helpful because yeah, like a lot of people don't really want to be in relationship with a man who's crying all the time and who sort of gets lost in the spiral of emotionality.
Mm.
So then there's like have you figured out now, after going through that initial process, like how to emote and how to show your heart, how to be in emotion in a way that feels like it builds connection versus getting lost in the spiral?
Yeah, I think, it's benefited a lot because once I learned that capacity, it was also alongside this shift that I was making with my life towards building the pillars around which my life was going to be built and the foundations that I've talked about already. So it wasn't just emotional vulnerability. That was also matched or counterbalanced in a certain way by my, starting to earn more money, starting to learn how to defend myself, having a good sense of direction with my life. So even if I had these moments of weakness, it was still couched and sort of balanced by this greater sense of command over my life and where we're going and the structure of the relationship that I was able to start creating with her, which obviously made her feel much more safe. So if she had to step into the masculine and hold me in certain moments when I was feeling extremely exposed emotionally, that was okay because she knew that, shortly afterwards I would be back in my power, so to speak, and able to, show up and hold her in the way that she needs to.
Yeah. Can you speak to just conceptually or philosophically this idea of, like, when you say the masculine and the feminine, what does that mean to you? Like, yeah. And knowing that we have both of these inside, like different people use these terms for different reasons, but I'm curious, when you say that, what does that mean?
Well, it's a touchy subject these days, isn't it?
Totally. And I recognize a lot of people even have resistance to talking about this in a meta way, but I feel like it's useful to attempt to do so, just for the sake of conversation, because if we don't talk about it, then other people with like potentially more dangerous or damaging ideas will fill that space. So yeah.
I mean, for me, it's like, I would say that I use these terms quite flexibly. Energetically, obviously, from the kind of polarity principle wise, we all have both masculine and feminine energies. It's just a useful model that helps us to articulate and express and somehow visualize what those energetic characteristics look like at either end of the spectrum. And a woman can display masculine traits, a man can display feminine traits, and that can switch interchangeably, very fluidly, regardless of gender. And then on top of that, I guess I also have this conceptualization of how a man can show up in a way that is masculine, which is a combination. For me, masculinity is not one rigid end of the spectrum. Actually, healthy masculinity is finding this point of balance in between where we get the beautiful archetypal masculine qualities, strength, groundedness, direction, purpose, And that is balanced by his capacity to be intuitive, empathetic, loving, sensitive, and vulnerable and sensual. And the beauty is finding that sweet spot in the middle where you have access to both. You no longer feel ashamed of being in one end or the other. And it's not toxic, it's deeply grounded and integrated. So for me, that's the way I relate to it anyway.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. And I love how, like, when you break it down to those actual qualities, it's like you can take potentially the gendered term out of it completely if we wanted to. Right. And in my mind, the terms masculine and feminine, I see how they're problematic for some people. I also see how they're a really big access point for a lot of people to kind of understand this stuff too, because most people in the world do see things in that kind of binary way, at least still, and if you can think about some stereotypically feminine qualities and stereotypically masculine qualities, and then learn like, maybe there's value to both of these internally. It can be a helpful way for some people to conceptualize these things. And then I've found that the deeper people go into that, oftentimes the less they even need to categorize in those different ways. And they see them as, these are just different internal categories of things that I can build to improve myself, like empathy, emotional intelligence, in addition to willpower, physical strength, motivation, et cetera, like, the different charts on a video game sort of a thing.
Yeah. And what I often encourage the men that I work with to do is to, by all means, go into that and understand it. But when you apply it in relationships, you can throw it away when you need to. Like, polarity is a useful principle that helps us to dance energetically and develop certain aspects of our character, which may be underdeveloped at this stage. Hey, I'm a masculine guy, but I haven't figured out how I feel my emotions. I do actually need to get in touch with my feminine. And that helps you to wrap your mind around what does that actually mean? How do I actually go about that? What does it involve? And then once you actually start to make progress in that direction, you can throw it out. Like my lover and I, we never talk about polarity between us. We never talk about, you're too in your feminine or you're not enough in your masculine. It's not even in the conversation, because we've got to a stage where we just flow. We're extremely comfortable with each other. The relationship is extremely healthy now because we just developed all these skills and tools around how to relate in a beautiful way. And, we don't need that map and model anymore because we're just enjoying the territory.
Yeah. Yeah. In my relationship, we also don't use those terms. But what I would say is that we have the qualities that those terms are in reference to. Those are in our awareness, and we modulate and adjust based on, wherever we're feeling in the moment with a lot of that stuff in mind. But never would we say like, you're too in your feminine right now, or you're too masculine right now, but they are useful frameworks to understand. And like, if I could just soapbox for a second, I do think it's really important to talk about masculine, feminine stuff and masculinity in general. Like, over the past bunch of years, there's been so much talk around different unhealthy examples of what masculinity is. There's been a lot of talk about the role of women in society in more productive ways, which has been awesome. But there hasn't been really much talk, if any, that I can see in the mainstream about what does it actually mean to be a healthy man. Like, there's lots of identifiers for what a toxic man is, but like, where's the model for what a healthy man is? Like, and is that even a thing? A lot of people don't even want to talk about that. They're like, we can't talk about that. Like, that's off limits. We can't identify what a healthy man is, because then that would mean all of a sudden a woman is not that thing. And, but there's a lot of guys out there who I think are maybe being a little bit left in the dark in some way. Like, people need something to relate to, and I think there's a lot of people out there, my younger self included, that could really use healthy examples of like how to be a man in the world.
Absolutely. And we see, when we look at the world, there's so much this crisis of masculinity. Men are struggling to find out that compass of where is the balance between being that toxic alpha kind of asshole or emotionally unavailable guy, let's say, and the people-pleasing nice guy on the other end of the spectrum. we need to find a balance somewhere in the middle, but we see rarely the role models that tell us how to actually do that, because we're conditioned to be, believing that our emotions are something feminine that makes you weak. Don't be a pussy and man up. And at the same time, when we're in the nice guy end of the spectrum, you get put in the friend zone. Women dominate you because they're in their masculine these days. You end up in a relationship that has the polarity completely flipped, and it's toxic. So it's like betwixt and between, and where do we go?
Yeah. Yeah. And there's probably going to be some pain in the process. I remember a relationship that I was in years ago, where at the time I was in a relationship with a woman who was a very like strongly self-defined feminist, who in our relationship, she would say all kinds of shit that was like disparaging towards men and like dismiss my opinion because, oh, well, you're just a white man, with your limited perspective, you don't really understand, and would say this to guys too. And at that current phase, or at that previous phase of my life, like I actually did question a lot of that stuff. Like, cause I didn't have good examples. I was like, wow, maybe I don't know, like maybe I don't have agency. Maybe it's just like, it really messed with my psychology for a while. And I stayed in a relationship and I stayed in an internal paradigm that wasn't healthy, that was sort of like bowing to and giving my power away instead of learning how to relate in a healthy way. Years later, like after going through a traumatic breakup and then taking multiple years without talking and then eventually forming a good friendship again, like we have since talked about it. And she's like, we both apologized to each other for our parts in that. And I've owned, like, I definitely had equal share of ownership in the shittiness of that dynamic. But one of the things she said to me was that, wow, I totally apologize for being like a baby feminist. Like I've left the cult of feminism, she said. And she's still, that could be taken in a lot of different ways. Like she's still very like pro women's rights and women's health and all of this stuff. But like, that was just an interesting phase for both of us to be in. And I think like, I know I'm not the only guy that has fallen into that trap, and it wasn't great for her either. And so I know that she wasn't the only woman that has fallen into that trap either. Like it hurt both of us in this sort of like imbalanced way.
Yeah, I can really relate to that. And in my previous relationship, that was a very similar dynamic, very strong, woman, me being this people-pleasing, needy kind of nice guy and not being super sure of myself and defaulting to her extremely strong views and losing myself in that relationship, losing my sense of autonomy and independence and being extremely out of integrity. And I realized, I was actually just reflecting last night at how, if I call it a toxic relationship, I need to acknowledge that I was toxic. I was extremely toxic, even though the conflict mind in me wants to always project and say, that was because of them and her and this. But if I'm going to take radical responsibility, I have to acknowledge that that was me.
Yeah.
That, I was 100% responsible for the relationship environment that I created because of the decisions that I made, the choices, the words that I said, my actions and everything. And that really created that really dysfunctional dynamic just as much as, I can't blame anyone else. I have to take full responsibility for it.
Yeah. Yeah. And that brings up a really important point that I wanted to get into as well, which is like, I'm happy to hear you say that. And I didn't think otherwise, but there's this piece around the victim mindset and victim mentality that I see in a lot of men's spaces, at least online. You see it a lot in some of the red pill world, and it's like this sort of like, oh, we're the victims of the feminine, or the et cetera, et cetera. Have you seen that? Do you know what I'm talking about?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know.
And what do you think about that? Like, could you have seen a path where you maybe went down that path instead of the taking responsibility path?
Look, I did go down that path. I went pretty deep I had a stage where I went pretty deep into the red pill. I was following Andrew Tate. I was close to joining the War Room and these kind of organizations that he was in because I was so jaded and pissed off by the results that I was getting in the relationship with women. and kind of getting dominated by them. And then when I found the red pill, I was like, oh my God, this makes so much sense. I've just been letting women walk all over me and I have had no backbone and I need to take my power back. And, you know, it's all the fault of feminism. And, you know, I got swept up into that ideology. Thankfully, it ran out of road pretty quickly because I saw the inherent limitations and realized that was actually kind of toxic masculinity in a new form. And so I was able to go into that and clearly see how that was not where I wanted to put myself, because it's inherently, I mean, I have very strong views on the victim mindset myself, because I just don't believe, I think that gives all of your power away. Which puts you in a weak position, whether you want to dress it up however you want with red pill bullshit, or you could actually just take humble responsibility for it, to admit the faults that you had and you know, apologize if necessary, and seek to create harmony again by deeply understanding your perspective and how you feel, the need that you had and the pain that you were experiencing, and that of the other. You know, in my past relationship, I need to empathize with her and understand exactly how I made her feel or she felt in that situation. The pain and the yearning, despite all of the toxic stuff that happened, there was two hearts that was basically trying to love and failing at it. Which I think is a much more grounded and mature approach that just leads to a lot more compassion, forgiveness, and understanding ultimately.
Yeah, and probably a more thriving relationship and sex life.
Yeah.
You know,
definitely.
if that's the end goal, which some people are like, oh, how can I have a better sex life? You know, and it's all one big spectrum of a picture. But yeah, man, thanks so much for sharing that. I didn't know that about you, but it makes a lot of sense. And I can relate too, in the sense of when I got out of that relationship that I mentioned previously, I was just pissed at women in general. I just thought like, I cannot fucking trust women. They're all out to control guys. Like, it's just a big, unhealthy bunch of bullshit out there. Like, I need to be on my own, separated away from them. Sure, I'll have sex with them, but keep them at a distance. Like, all this kind of stuff. It's very self-protective, very victim mindset, very ultimately unhealthy. But I could see how it would be easy to get caught up in that and never actually move beyond, you know? And there was also a moment that really struck me with that, and how to articulate this. Like, I haven't had, in the grand scheme of things, like that many really intensely bad experiences in my life. Like, I feel very lucky about that. That one breakup was definitely traumatic for me. But then when I think about all the experiences women have had on the other side with you know, the statistics around sexual assault and harassment and all that stuff, and how they relate to men, and the work that they must have to do to come back from that to actually trust men again. It was just like this big wake up call to realize, like, wow, I had this big traumatic breakup. And now for about a year, it was very hard for me to trust women. And I was angry at women for about a year, just from a traumatic breakup, right? Like, whoa, the amount of work that women must be doing to be able to show up in right relationship with us. Like, really, I don't know, it meant a lot. Like, it brought up a lot of emotion to me. Like, wow, it helped me kind of see the other side, or the gravity of that. Does that make sense? Did that kind of explain that?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think it's a sentiment we see a lot is people getting, it's very easy to get upset with women for being too much in their masculine, for being very protected and guarded and having this like very strong shield up. And I hear men often complaining like, oh, the women are too masculine these days. And, you know, it's hard to find a woman that's actually open. But it's completely understandable given how men have behaved. And it's not very easy for a woman to open up if she doesn't feel safe.
Yeah.
So part of the work that I'm doing is trying to educate men on the ways to actually make a woman feel safe again by deeply understanding her, being able to empathize with her, providing the structure, safety, and security in the relationship environment to encourage her and give her the space to open up when she's ready, and to kind of clean up the mess that other men may have left behind. Of course, she still has her own work to do, and it's not she has to want to do that and soften and let go of that shield and drop into her feminine. But we as men can do so much to encourage that and create the space that invites her to do that and feel safe enough to do that if we're showing up in the right way.
Yeah. So how do you show up in that way? Like, what are some things we can do to create that?
Well, look, I think there's been a lot that we've talked about in this conversation, which kind of paints that picture. And I think so much of it is having the fundamentals of your life in order, having certain, survival taken care of is a really great place to start.
Yeah.
Once you've mastered survival, then obviously integrating your emotions, your trauma, your wounds, starting to do all of that inner kind of work is an amazing step to take, because then the relationship that you form on the back of that is one of deep emotional intimacy, trust, safety, and a journey together, which is based on healing. And then if you can create a relationship around that where you're both conscious of each other's wounds, you know what the trauma and the sensitive points are, you know how to give the other person what they need, and you know how to you ask for what you need yourself when you're feeling triggered. This just smooths out the whole dynamic and the space of the relationship, where both people can actually relax into a state of authenticity. They can feel comfortable being themselves and feel self-expressed, and also move towards having a state of secure attachment. And then boom, that's pretty much most of the battle. And then once you have that beautiful relationship foundation in place, then that's an amazing resource in your life.
Yeah.
Then you can truly go out there into the world as a man and conquer and build and create and help people, because you have this amazing safe harbor back at home, which is super healthy, to nourish you and recover and, return from the storms of life and provision yourself so you can keep going out there and making a difference in the world.
Yeah. Make the world a better place. I think that's in many ways the pinnacle, or the, like, once somebody reaches a point of financial stability, once somebody has, a healthy, well, maybe not even once somebody has a healthy relationship, but once you've mastered the survival things, so to speak, and built enough abundance for yourself that you can live in a good way, it's like, then what? Then, like, I think help make the world a better place. Like, figure out something you can plug into to help improve the lives of others. Like, that's one of the most meaningful things to be able to do, at least for me. I think
absolutely.
Yeah, there's a couple of different traditions that talk about how, like, service to something greater is like one of the highest, most rewarding things you can do in life. And I think that's accurate, Yeah.
Totally. And I think it's a core need, contribution, and the rewards that we receive inherently from offering something beautiful that others need. And then that is a gift of love, and that nourishes us on an extremely deep level. I mean, that's at least how I experience it. Yeah.
Yeah. Are there any other topics or things that, like, have sort of gotten brought up or that are on the tip of your tongue based on this conversation that you feel like, ooh, I want to bring that in. I want to make sure we talk about that, or that we didn't sort of touch on as deeply as you would have liked so far?
No, I think we've covered this. I mean, this topic, I think it's very, I don't want to stray too far from this, because I think it's like a really important point to drive home. The only other thing that I would add is, I think one of the things that has really helped us the most to go from toxic relationship to really thriving, healthy dynamic is understanding conflict, understanding conscious communication, and learning how to hold the truth of any relational moment and any upset that we might feel as being her experience plus my experience. Inherently, we want to, usually when we are triggered or faced with a moment of uncertainty, we want to demonize the other person and judge them and hold them accountable in order to validate what we're feeling in that moment. What has been so instrumental for us is developing this capacity for me to not react defensively, to be able to hold what she's feeling and also advocate for my own needs in that moment. Because before in past relationships, I would be somewhat very attuned to trying to like please and understand and apologize and make up for and this, but it was at the neglect of my own needs. And that built up this big frustration inside of me because my needs were going unmet and unexpressed. So learning to actually articulate that was such a key shift for me, where I realized that actually my needs are super important. And it's actually very damaging to the relationship if I don't express how I'm feeling, what I think, and what I need in certain moments, especially, in difficult moments. So developing this more artful, easeful way of articulating boundaries, not as like a wall, but as an invitation to actually create mutually beneficial outcomes in the relationship, was an absolute game changer, because we went from conflicts that would span weeks or months to, if we fight, when we fight, it's rare now, but we're over it in the same day. And often we can dissolve it in the moment, because we've learned how to communicate in a much more conscious fashion, because we've learned how to articulate our needs and our boundaries in a way that includes the other person instead of just this my way or the highway approach. So this was, this is such a shift. And I think a lot of men need this understanding and need these teachings to be able to get there.
Yeah. I think that's super important. I mean, a lot of people think of communication as this sort of like, oh, it's a soft skill that don't need to spend time doing this. But I think it's really like one of the most important things we can do is learn how to communicate effectively. Like that shit will help you in all areas of your life, not just romantic, but like business, friendships, family, etc. One of the biggest things that was a huge turning point in my relational growth was studying communication for like 2 years, just not in any sort of official school, but I was regularly taking classes on nonviolent communication and intimacy and how to express needs and desires and this sort of a thing. And I do encourage looking into nonviolent communication for most people, with the caveat that it's like, it's a set of tools, just like anything else, right? And you could use tools in a shitty way that doesn't help people, or you could learn to use them in an effective way. And for me, it really helped me understand how to navigate my own internal emotions and how to communicate them effectively. And yeah, it was a little bit messy in the beginning, but for me, that was a useful system that helped a lot. And I know some people get stuck in the sort of learning phase of it, but it's helpful to have different things to draw from. And I'd say like communication.
Yeah, because it can be inherently clunky when you first begin. Like it's this reflective listening and validating. It can often be very robotic. And I see when guys pick it up, we deliver it in such a way that our lover is just like, what the fuck are you doing? Like, you're pissing me off even more now, because I don't want you to hear you validating my stuff with your robotic recipe. Like, I want you to actually feel me. But we need a stepping stone to get us to the point where we actually learn how to feel. We learn how to label what we're feeling, so we can actually articulate what is arising in our experience. And that's what so many men lack, is that basic fundamental of actually being able to recognize what the fuck I'm actually feeling right now. What are the tools that I have at my disposal to get clarity around that? And how can I articulate that in a way that doesn't make me come across like a absolute pussy, so I can deliver it in a way that actually creates deeper trust, intimacy, and turn on with my lover, but it's at the same time deeply integral and truthful and vulnerable. And there is a sweet spot there. It's just, it takes work to get there. It takes education, takes commitment, and a lot of practice.
Totally.
But it's 100%, 1,000% worth it if you can push through that initial discomfort.
For sure. And I think at least with NVC, nonviolent communication specifically, like a lot of people get really caught up in learning the actual speaking techniques of it. But there's this whole other side of it, which is really about, like you said, like cultivating the inner state of consciousness to be able to be aware of what's actually going on, and to be able to show up in good relationship with the person that you're with. Like that's foundational before even using the technique, it's like, okay, what's my internal consciousness? What's my internal state? How am I showing up here? Then using the tools from that place versus, the sort of top down, use the hammer kind of technique. That could be a whole other 2-hour discussion though.
For sure. Yeah. I think one of the easiest things to do with that is something that I find extremely useful is just having the needs list and the feelings list.
Yeah.
And just being able to pull up those pages, and in a moment of uncertainty where my lover said, what's up with you? What's wrong? And I have to sit there for 5 minutes and I'm like, I don't know what I'm feeling right now.
Yeah.
But give me a bit of space and time. I just need to figure out what I'm feeling. I don't want to project it on you. And then I'll go into my room. I'll take a little bit of space. I'll look at that list and I'll be like, what the fuck am I feeling? And sit down with it. And then that actually gives me, and it's like, okay, I'm feeling neglect.
Yeah.
Interesting. I've never put that word onto the feeling that I've experienced for my entire life. And all of a sudden it has a name.
Mm.
And then I'm able to actually articulate with her. When this situation happened and you said that thing, I felt like neglected. And that took me back to my childhood when my parents neglected me then. That's a soft spot for me, And then boom, the doorway to intimacy is wide open and we're back in connection.
Yeah. Kind of like a user manual.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I've done that many times too. It's super useful. Cool, man. Well, yeah, I did have one other thing. I know we're getting here to the end of the hour, but just to acknowledge that this other piece exists too. Like there's a lot of potential overwhelm, I think, in guys, or like it's easy to disconnect and go into things like porn and video games, for example, instead of putting in the effort to actually learn these skills and to create useful relationships. And I just wanted to like at least name those words in this conversation, even if we don't go into a deep dive into them, because they're a really big reality for a lot of people as well. Wondering if you have any thoughts you just want to throw in on that nugget before we close.
Look, I think one of the most essential things we can do as men and as humans is actually learn about our nervous system and to notice the states of dysregulation, stress, overwhelm. When we go towards these coping mechanisms, porn, video games, drugs, alcohol, we're literally just bypassing that stuff. It makes us feel good for a little bit, but it's sweeping it under the rug. And that's what is going to build up inside of you and cause you to have cancer 30 years from now. The sooner you can learn to actually face and turn towards and sit with whatever you're experiencing and learn to feel it in order to heal it, then you're really moving into a territory where your personal growth and development, your relationships, your business, your passions in life are starting to go to accelerate exponentially because you're actually very, very connected to what you're feeling and the environment that you're in. The nervous system, for me, it's like the fundamental building block and the key on which everything else is built. And the more we can become in tune with that, it's a superpower.
Boom. Yeah, agreed. I think simple and sweet. Yeah, simple and sweet. Jasper, thank you so much for being here for this conversation and diving into these topics and diving into some topics that I know are a little risque to get into and edgy, and some people will probably be upset about them, but I think it's, done with the intention for the greater good. And if people want to work with you or find out more about what you do, how can they find you?
Probably the best place to go is just to my Instagram, awakened_eros. That's where most of my content is. I also have a website and blog. thelegendarylover.com is where I'm at the moment. And I'm building a bunch of courses and structure around this much more conscious approach to masculinity, finding this sweet spot between the stoic, alpha, emotionally unavailable guy and the needy, people-pleasing nice guy. So for guys that want to develop that more conscious approach towards masculinity and use that to develop the kind of relationship and life that they have always desired, this is the work that I'm doing. So, yeah.
Awesome. You have any programs coming up?
I've just launched a program called The Conscious Masculine. I had 30 guys join that. So it's in the kind of beta stage, let's say, and I'll be scaling that up to make it widely accessible to men across the world. So, yeah, if you're interested, it's a low cost, easy entry group program with a ton of value. So, yeah.
Awesome. And we'll put links to all that in the show notes. Jasper, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for listening. If you as a listener have any questions, or if you're watching on YouTube, type them in a comment, like shoot an email. Let me know. I'd love to hear what you think about this episode. And yeah, reach out to Jasper. Hope you all have a beautiful, beautiful rest of your day. I'll see you next time. Peace.